So if I just introduce myself, my name's Lisa. I'm a chartered psychologist, and I work with companies, particularly managers, around helping their employees be the best they can, which basically starts with management and leadership. Working essentially through a kind of coaching capacity, and also running workshops and sort of training opportunities, and really helping organizations unpick what's going on. So actually I'm not someone who likes just to go in and do a one-off tick box thing. I'm much more kind of the person who likes to really build up relationships and work out, okay, what are the real challenges and what's going on, and how can we make things better? Always starting with people. For me, people is number one. You get people right, you get business right. And I met Becca, gosh, when did we meet Becca? End of last year?
It was at the NatWest
yes.
session that we did, wasn't it, together?
Yeah. So we were both invited to talk at a NatWest business event about workplace culture. And so I was talking about that from a psychological perspective, and Becca was talking about it from an HR perspective. And there was a real overlap in terms of our thinking. So we've kind of joined forces and are working together to support companies now, which is a great opportunity. And today is really good that we wanted to make it quite informal and quite chatty, so you have an opportunity to really ask what are your challenges, what are your questions. I can't promise we're going to have all the answers, or I'm certainly not going to have all the answers, but really just to be able to kind of explore some of the issues that are coming up, because this week has been a slightly crazy week. So Becca, do you want to introduce yourself and say something about you? I know most people on this call know you.
Well, they do. They all know me, because two clients and Steffi used to work in my office, so they do know me very well.
Oh, right, okay.
So, hi everybody, you know what I do. Yeah, you know what I do, and I'm really grateful to Lisa for joining me today. Thank you, because I think it's really important that we work closely together on some of the well-being issues. I was just telling Lisa about some of the issues that I've had this week in relation to trying to get people back to work, and it's been more difficult than I anticipated. And I know we're in unprecedented times, and I'm getting a bit fed up with saying the unprecedented word, because it is a bit boring, and we all know that it's different to how it is before, has been before. But it has been incredibly tricky, and things that I thought would just be a shoe-in and would be smooth sailing have been really difficult. And I think Lisa's input to some of the things that I'm going to be doing over the next few weeks will be imperative, because people are really anxious about going back to work. A lot of my clients are construction or engineering based or manufacturing based, and they've had to go back to work because that's what the government says we should try and do. Many of them are out in the open air, so that hasn't been such an issue, but getting people back into an office environment has been incredibly tricky. People are really anxious. They're very nervous about going back into a workplace with other people that they haven't maybe seen for a number of weeks. We're maybe, is it number 7, number 8, number week 8 in shutdown. And I think people are really anxious about cross-contamination, about being nervous and not so trusting of other people that they're working with, who might not have the same level of cleanliness or social conscience as they have. I've had lots of issues this week with people saying, well, I've been watching them on Facebook, and they are going next door to their neighbours, and they're hugging each other on VE Day, and yet they're going to come back into a workplace with me. So it's maybe not the obvious things that I thought it would be from an HR standpoint, having the rules and the posters on the walls. It's much more subtle than that, and I think making people feel comfortable about going back to the workplace, and whatever that looks like. And there will reach a point when, if people still don't want to engage, when you're going to have to talk about having a different transaction, and it might well be that you have to challenge your employment relationship and maybe put it under a little bit of duress to get what you need as a business owner. And it's trying to avoid that at all costs, but I think there will get to a point when we have to have that tricky conversation.
I think it's really important, the whole piece about engagement, because like you say, Becca, it's the whole, you can have rules are one thing, and all the advice comes out and the guidance is X, Y, and Z. But actually what people didn't really anticipate was going to lockdown seemed a bit of a shock, but actually going to lockdown is a lot simpler for people psychologically than coming out of a lockdown. So, you know, people can just stop and stay at home, and the message is very clear and the message has been very successful. But actually coming out of that, as you say, all the repercussions, people are, they lose that sense of control that we have when we're at home, because as you say, you're around other people who you don't have control over. And I think that's where we need to be putting our support in terms of helping people feel more engaged, and it's how to encourage that engagement in a way that feels safe. So I talk a lot with people about helping them understand how the brain works, and that actually when we're stressed, when we're anxious, when we're essentially just worried about what's going on, our emotional arousal is very, very high, and it takes over our ability to have rational thought. You know, as soon as our emotional arousal is high, it kind of hijacks, you know, your emotional cortex, this kind of the clever bit up here. And as soon as that's blocked, that's where your problem solving is, your rational thinking, and all the stuff that you need in order to be able to think logically and calmly about work. So you've got people saying you should be doing X, Y, and Z, and then actually your emotional brain saying don't want to go near that. And it's how you overcome those challenges. And that's what we're going to be talking about a bit about today. But before we do that, would people like to introduce themselves in terms of saying a little bit about what your particular challenges are? I don't know if anyone is happy to come off their mute and perhaps just say kind of, are you finding it okay at the moment? Is your experience all right? Is it kind of feeling okay, or actually are you experiencing some challenges? You don't have to share the challenges if you don't want to, but just give us a sense of what's going on. Anyone want to?
So I run a bespoke carpentry business.
Okay.
And I work with Becca and with Catherine. And as a business, we haven't really stopped, but we found restrictions, either on site or sites closing or getting materials. So there's been a problem there. But as to working with subcontractors, they appreciate that it is what it is. So I haven't really had staff issues. Becca's found me a great contracts manager who's yet to start, which is a problem, but he also understands that he can't start. And everyone's bearing with us. Over the next couple of weeks, I can see us really, because like Becca said, we work in a different environment, and that's why it's not been an issue. So we're going to get really busy, and guys are chomping at the bit to go back to work.
Yeah.
Wow, that must feel pretty positive.
Yeah, it is massive. Whether I'm ready for it or not, it's another story. But it is good, of course it is, because I don't want them sat at home.
Yeah.
It's not good for their mental health. It's not good for their it's not good for their minds, and it's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's not normal.
Agreed. And they're all quite happy. They're excited about working, about being engaged, and
yeah, definitely. There's no
brilliant,
because we never work. It's not an office environment, so it's never been a problem. The problems come where you have welfare facilities, you have a canteen, and there might be 200 guys in there. But I think people just realise that they have to be sensible. As long as we're sensible and we still appreciate the risk, there's no reason why we can't go back to work. I'm just pushing it all the time. You just have to be. You have to be careful. Yeah.
And I think that whole being sensible is something that's just it's just so important to remind people that they can take some control over what's happening by making sensible choices. And I know there's been lots of criticism of the government saying they're not telling us enough detail about what, who's allowed to do this or what exactly you're allowed to do. We want more information. There are too many gaps, too vague in certain areas. But actually then on the other foot, there's criticism when people do dictate every single detail, that I don't want to be told every single detail. I want some degree of flexibility. So I think I'd agree that it's kind of reminding people that they have, there is clear guidance, and then it's trying to make sensible choices within that, and looking at what you have control over and how to minimize risk. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Becca.
Yeah, I think the guidelines have have increasingly been improved by the government. You know,
Yeah.
they were put under very difficult circumstances. First off, they had to make some really quick decisions, and there was no meat on the bones of any of the points that they put out initially, which caused absolute pandemonium from an HR standpoint, because people had all sorts of questions, and we just had to hold our hands up and say, we just don't know. We can only do the best we can within our sort of common sense and what we know about HR and the employment contract to date. And I think people started forgetting that they had an employment contract, that the HMRC was suddenly controlling the rhetoric and telling everybody what they could and couldn't pay. And people were focusing more on that than they were on actually the arrangement that they have on paper with their employees, and making what HMRC were paying fit within the terms and conditions that they had on the table. So I think there's been a lot of discussion about what people should have, what they should be paid, holidays. Everyone's got their own agenda as to what's important to them. And I think, and this is probably going to sound really unfair and not very well-being focused, but I do think that business has been lost in all of this. And everybody's running around panicking about what it means for them individually and personally, and they haven't really thought about what it means for the business owners and for business going forwards and for their jobs going forwards. You know, there are lots of people on furlough at the moment who haven't appreciated the fact that actually in the background there's a lot of business planning going on, and that they may well not have jobs to come back to. You know, I'm already looking at redundancy processes for 2 or 3 of my clients. And that's pretty horrific and scary and unpleasant. And with that goes all of the treating people properly and fairly and communicating. And I do think that we've lost sight of what we're trying to achieve here, which is the business getting back to normality and people engaging back in their employment relationships. And I think there's a fine line between pandering to people's insecurities and providing them a safe environment for them to go back to work, because we have got to get back to normality at some point.
Yeah, I think you've
progress, but we need to make those steps forward.
Yeah, I think you've you know, 2 things you just mentioned about relationships and communication, and I think that's what people have to be really focusing on at the moment in terms of helping the focus become business about the business. It's about communicating what the intentions are of the business, what situation the business is in now, and what planning's going on and what the future looks like in terms of helping people get engaged when they can, you know, there are so many factors that we know help people become engaged after a period of uncertainty, which is really important right now, is that sense of having a clear view of what's going to happen in the future. So I think a lot of managers that I've been speaking to are kind of working really hard behind the scenes, but almost in like a little silo of, I've got to try and come up with what the future's going to look like, and it's got to be all mapped out, it's got to look perfect. But actually they don't know, and you can kind of come up with a plan that feels like a pretty good fit, but then actually that might go out the window in 2 days' time or next week. And it's also then communicating that with the team and saying, actually I don't know the answer to these questions, but as soon as I know, I'll share that with you. Or this is what I do know, and this is how we're thinking about it. Or these are the expectations I have of you, and this is how you fit into the picture. So make it very clear in terms of, you know, what you're expecting of them and what their role looks like, which comes back to that whole, you know, I'm not just ignoring you sitting in the background. I'm building you into my picture or not, but there's transparency around that.
Yeah, I think it's about knowing your team as well. You know, you know your team, you know who can take what level of conversation and communication and information. There are some of my clients that kind of have a broad brush approach to that, and that's not the right way. You know, I think we need to identify who can take the bad news and impart that so that they understand. And there's some people that maybe would not react well to that, so you have to shield them from it.
Yeah.
And it's about knowing your staff and knowing what you can and can't impart that's not going to put everybody into a flat spin of panic and worry. And small business owners, more often than not, people do know their staff. They're just maybe shying away from having those conversations because they find them difficult.
Yeah, and I think that there's so much evidence around, so much research being done that shows that employees want their managers to be communicating with them more. So when all the studies are done, employees, is always over half employees say they want their managers to be sharing more information with them, to be keeping them in the loop more, to be communicating more. And often managers will say, yes, we're doing that, but that's not being perceived on the floor, on the ground. So there is a real gap. And I think the communication bit and that relationships, which comes back to knowing employees really well, knowing who can take what information, who needs what encouragement, who needs a check-in every day as opposed to once a week, all that kind of stuff. That, you know, you have to have those communication systems really well established. And I think a lot of managers think they're doing it quite well, but they're not doing it well enough. And that, you know, it's about asking employees that's not pandering to them, it's actually asking what information they need, or kind of how often they want checking in with, or in what format, and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Are there any questions before Becca and I continue from anyone in terms of what's going on for you? Because this is an opportunity for you to say, you know, this is the challenge we're experiencing.
Lisa, I'm happy to jump in, just give you a dimension on our situation. We're one of Rebecca's customers. I run a 26-person data business based in Farnborough. Mm-hmm. Unlike the male Catherine Bond, our problem is dealing with a different character type. We're largely staffed by introspective data scientists, mm-hmm. for whom the working at home opportunity has been the opportunity of a lifetime to hide in their own cave. And getting these people back to work is going to be a significant problem. And the issue, as you've talked about, is the emotional insecurity, paranoia, agoraphobia, all of the things that people feel about re-entry back into a frightening and scary place, occupied largely by extroverts and mad people like me. It's uncomfortable for them, and they don't like it. And the problem, they see it from their lens, is that they're incredibly effective working remotely, and they're doing more shit than ever, and blah 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 and blah blah blah. But the reality is, the thing that suffers as the head of the business is you can normally run business as usual and stuff that just processes. What you can't do is cultural change and the creative processes and proper brainstorming. Because Zoom is absolutely shocking. You spend all your time looking at the ugliest person in the room rather than actually concentrating on the business brainstorming issue that you're trying to solve. You just can't do it. So you have to get people in a place, and it's going to be a real struggle for us. And I absolutely know it, because they don't see the disbenefit of them working remotely. So we're going to have all sorts of challenges, and I can already feel it. There's this kind of self-employed mentality. You know, I'm very happy to take my salary, very happy to take all the flexibility that work gives me, keep taking it and taking it and taking it. I'm thinking to myself, all right, pal, this contract has now become too one-sided. So that's just a quick run through of some of the thought processes that I'm challenging, that I'm wrestling with.
So have you had an opportunity yet to talk individually with those people about the benefits, you know, what it is that they're going to get, the positive benefits for them from coming back at least part of the week? I don't know if you're expecting them to come back and work full time in the office, or if you've got flexibility around that.
We haven't sorted it out yet, Lisa. We don't know what we're doing yet, because actually we're pretty effective, and because we're an information business, we can work really effectively in a distributed fashion, and our workspace is really only a social and meeting environment rather than a traditional working environment. So we haven't faced that yet.
So I know from talking to a couple of other people who are in HR directors or managers, where they've been experiencing similar challenges, and they have agreed to look at actually a bit more flexibility around the working. So the stuff that doesn't need to be done in the office can be done at home, because that suits those individuals more. But then highlighting the importance of coming into the office and what the benefits are for doing that. So in terms of really focusing on the kind of creativity, the collaboration, so on, which is much easier to achieve face-to-face than over Zoom or whatever platform you're using, and really to focus on the that kind of piece around helping them feel engaged, or if it doesn't feel right for them, at least for the colleagues that they're engaging with, to help them all feel part of a team, being able to work on whichever development they're focusing on at that time. So that sense of kind of collaboration, and it's highlighting those strengths, the strength of coming into the office for them, and also identifying specifically what their issues are. So you're talking about they're worried about going back to the workplace, but actually do you know what's underneath that? Do you know what the detail is in terms of, is it,
yes, they don't want to.
And I
guess and that comes back to, you know, the conversation Becca and I were having just before you guys joined us, and actually there are some people who are saying actually don't want to because it just suits me working from home. And that's where I think a lot of managers are now beginning to think a bit more about flexibility around actually, if it does suit people to work from home more, and they can work from home more, then is that okay for some of the week that they do work from home a bit more? But then we still have requirements as a business that we need people to come in for this amount of time, and therefore being very clear about that, and then helping to reassure them that, you know, asking them and saying, what is it getting in the way, other than I don't want to, because that's not a very valid reason legally, but in terms of what's getting in the way specifically around the worries, what's kind of driving their anxiety, if there is genuine anxiety there, and then helping them very specifically overcome those issues. And I know, Becca, you were talking about a fab checklist you put together to help companies.
Yes, yeah, we've done quite a lot of work with that, with companies that are going back this week and next week, and it's been quite interesting to see some of the issues that people are concerned about, and it almost sounds trivial when they're saying it out loud, but it's real to them. You know, I don't want to hang my coat next door to somebody else. I don't want the air conditioning on. I don't want this. I don't want that. So the list is long and endless, and we can accommodate most of that. But the fact of the matter is that people are comfortable sitting on their sofa, combining Netflix with sort of 80% productivity. And at some point, you have to take a view as a company that actually 100% productivity is what we need. And so unless somebody's working at home on 100% productivity and everything's tickety-boo, and the company can support that, and you know, from a health and safety point of view, everybody's got their workplace set up at home adequately enough, there is going to come a point when people have to engage and get back to normality, back into the workplace. And although everybody's talking about the workplace changing in regards to flexibility and people working from home more and more, I don't think that's going to be an instant thing on the back of this. I think people need to get to normality, and then by normality I mean back to the workplace as it was before, and then reevaluate things with a bit more time, rather than working at pace. I think there's been too much change, too much reaction to the situation we find ourselves in, and we almost need to just make sure that we get back to a form of normality and then reevaluate again, rather than reacting quickly to things and making promises to people about working from home that maybe don't suit the business. And I think that's my biggest concern, that you kind of, it's not about giving in to people, but it's about assessing what is right for the business and making sure that is the first and foremost, because that's why
and I think it's interesting actually, it is looking at what's right for the business. And I know some managers who said that they want their people working from home more because they can cut down on office space, so they haven't got teams in, and actually it's working in their favour having people working at home. And I think, you know, certainly the conversations I've been having with companies, if they're wanting to look at their business being a success, I think everyone it all comes to so individual and so unique. Some people are saying actually when people come back into the workplace, they want it to be different from day one. And this is the time to implement change and to completely change the direction we're going in and how we're working, and, you know, really reevaluate our purpose, like what are we trying to achieve, how are we trying to achieve it, and let's just do the whole big change in one go, because we're changing anyway, so we might as well just do the whole thing. And then other people are much more comfortable with what you just said, Becca, which is about kind of trying to revert to some sort of sense of normality, and where people feel comfortable, so kind of going back to their secure base, if you like, before they start taking other steps forward. And I think it probably depends on the kind of manager you are, to, you know, in terms of which direction you go in. But I think whatever happens, underpinning all that has to be that relationship. So it's that sense of really, really good communication, lots and lots of feedback. So lots of feedback about what's working, what's not working, both ways. So for the employee to be able to say that, but also the employer to be able to say, actually, this is working well, this isn't working well, this is why, this is what we're expecting, this is what we're needing from you, this is kind of what we're looking at doing next, and this is how you fit into the picture. And actually, we do need you in the office, because when you're in the office, this is the value you offer, this is the value you provide us. So really help, but it always comes down to that sense of helping people feel recognised for what it is that they offer. And if that's best in the office, then it's highlighting those strengths.
Yeah, combined with what they're contractually signing up for.
Exactly.
I'm not sure that's persuasive enough, really. I think I get the full picture as far as coercing people and persuading them that they're wonderful and all the rest of it. But there comes a point where you have to rebase the arrangement. And I'm very happy to have a conversation with colleagues who wish to be 60% productive about exactly how much of their salary they're going to continue drawing. Because sometimes people just have a weird perspective on how much the company should bend over backwards in order to give them complete freedom. And they draw parallels, they draw parallels from other people. Oh, well, so-and-so works 5 days a week from home. So-and-so gets free healthcare. So-and-so gets a huge company car allowance. And they conflate all of these things into a picture, which is one of deserving huge care, limited pressure, fundamentally a free ride. And whilst we're in the war on talent and we have to attract people by giving them fantastic challenge and learning and all the other things, there has to come a point where you say, sorry, the deal that you signed was to work in a building. This is the building, this is where we work, this is where you work. If you don't want to work, then you can go away. And you can get your arms around people as much as you like, and that's fine for those who are persuadable. But I fear for a large part of the service economy, I don't think it's the same in manufacturing or in the building trades where everyone realizes they've got to work like shit just to live. But I think in some of the environments that we work in terms of knowledge industries, people need to be drawn back into a better understanding of what they actually have to do to earn a living.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's a happy combination between listening to people's reservations and dealing with their genuine concerns, and actually drawing a line and saying, we've listened, we've put these things in place, now it's time to get back to work, and whatever the business needs is what needs to be focused on.
Yeah, and you have to have that clarity, those expectations, and this is the bottom line, this is what we need you to do, and this is what you're contractually obliged to do. I always try and help managers do that in a kind of leading people rather than pushing people, because you want them, once they're back in the workplace, to be engaged rather than just being present. Otherwise you end up with a whole load of staff who are, presenteeism is really high, so they're there in body, but that's about it. I think if you can get people back into the workplace by saying, yes, actually this is what we need you to do, and this is what contractually you're obliged to do, but also this is why we're, this is why we value, this is why we need you here, this is what you offer when you're here, this is the reason we need you here. If you can help them understand how they fit into that picture and why that's important for you, it's kind of more of a pull than just saying, actually the bottom line is you've got to be here. So it's kind of that balance, isn't it? There's no, you can't just do one without the other.
No, but there are quite clear guidelines now from government as to what shielding looks like, what self-isolation looks like, all of those things that are quite categorically set out now, which are going to give us a good framework for getting people back to work, coupled with listening to their concerns and dealing with them best we can. Yeah. But by the same token, it's about business, and that's why people are employed.
Exactly.
Rebecca, in our environment, you may know that probably the most attractive thing we can do to incentivize people back to work involves donuts.
That works for me, Rich.
Yeah. So it's hard. It's hard to have free donuts if you work remotely.
Yeah, but there will be some clever dick who will give you the link to a delivery service. You know that, don't you?
Donuts are us. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, but joking aside, you can make some. There's nothing that requires us to make rewards evenly available to people who are both in the office and remotely.
No, and FOMO is one of your, I think, is going to be the biggest return to work positive ever. Because
I'm really conflicted on this, Rebecca, because I hate the idea of making people paranoid about not being at work, and I do like the idea of people being really efficient and working from home and being great employees. So I'll probably come across as a right Nazi in this call, but the reality is that there's a balance to be struck between reward and how you manufacture those rewards to achieve the aims you want. And if it is donuts in the office and people realise there is an element they're missing out, or there is some social interaction that they're missing, then I think there's a natural draw back to whatever is that social nucleus around which everything operates. And maybe we can use that as managers. Maybe we can use that to drive the goals.
Yeah, I think that's exactly that's what I was trying to say. Maybe I wasn't saying it particularly well, but the whole kind of drawing people back in terms of the positives of why people would want to go back to work, what they're going to get from work, the positives of being back in the workplace. And I was chatting to someone, I was doing some training with a business park earlier this week, and they were talking about the fact that they're very aware that businesses are leaving the business parks. They're just saying everyone can work from home. And they're trying to keep the businesses there, and so they're looking at business park what they can offer. And it is that reward. If you come and work here, you get access to these free. They were running free workshops, or you get access to, this particular. It might be donuts, coffee, or whatever it is, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's just whatever motivates your particular employees. But it's that sense of, if you come together, if you join us and do what we want you to do, there is something in it for you. I think that's entirely appropriate. Is that, we all know that it's good to work from home, but actually it is also good to connect with people.
Yeah, and we've been doing some recruitment for Rich at the moment, and some of the things that I've been putting on the adverts have actually gained a bit of traction. So, like saying, there's free parking. There are restaurants and cafes when they open again. There'll be gyms when they open again. It's that sense of community that people crave. And I do also think that being at home for 8 weeks working from home, the novelty has worn off somewhat. Well, it has for me. So I think people do crave to be with each other. I know that some people are introverts, but even so, it's still that banter. It's still that routine of leaving your house, going somewhere else, and coming back to a home environment that isn't dominated by work activity. Will be quite a big draw for people to go back to the workplace. But it is about addressing their concerns, because some people are genuinely anxious, and we need to deal with that. But some people will be just wanting to stay in their pajama bottoms and do the odd Zoom call and do the best they can. But we're moving out of that wartime mentality now, and we need to look at the productivity for the good of the business. Yeah.
Are there any other questions that people wanted to ask? I'm just aware of time. Or any other points that anyone wanted to make, to share?
Only just to say thank you, and you've made me think a bit more about attraction rather than demand.
Push. Leading people is always better than just pushing them.
Yeah, so I think I've got a bit bent out of shape. You see, I'm a social extrovert, obviously with a face for radio because I'm not on screen. But I struggle massively with the lack of immediacy that comes from working with people right in front of me, because so much of the pace of work is about 2-second, 5-second interactions with people, which you just don't do and you can't do in this environment. It's hard also to feel how people are responding and motivating when you're doing it down a webcam.
Yeah, there's you cannot get the same. Nothing's the same over a webcam. It's just not the same. You need to have that face-to-face interaction when you can, and that's one of the things you can have to stress to the people on your team if they're not wanting to come in and they think they can do it all remotely. It's not. You can do a lot of things remotely, but you can't do everything.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Any final thoughts or reflections or anything before we sign off? Rebecca, did you want to say anything about what our thoughts were for future?
Yeah, I don't know whether people would think it was useful to have this on a weekly basis at the same time, so and different subjects, maybe obviously using Lisa's expertise and my government guidance notes. Whether it would be useful to have something regularly every week. I mean, I think that's what we were planning, to do something at the same time once a week, so that people could drop in depending on what the subject was, and maybe we could get more people involved in it and share different thoughts, because I think these are uncharted times, and we need to just share what we've got in relation to what we're doing, so that we can maybe pick up best practice from each other. Would that be useful? Yeah,
happy to. I can't commit the time. It'll have to be subject specific, but yeah, happy to join in for any content and where I can be of benefit.
thank you.
Thank you. What we would just say, it'd be really helpful if and I'm guessing you've all come here today because you've seen one of the posts that Becca or I put up on LinkedIn. If that's the case, you'd be happy just to comment on it. That'd be really helpful for us, just in terms of knowing how, what you've got from today, if you found it useful, so that it helps Becca and I decide how to shape these sessions going forward. So any comments would be very gratefully received. Thank you.